All right, it's time to get on to part 2 of this. Now, before I work on the rest of the side rod stuff, the manual actually recommends installing the firebox parts, which is probably a good idea considering how delicate some of the upcoming pieces are. So here are the two main parts of the firebox right here. I'll just get them out. All right, now let's see how these fit in place. So according to the manual, this one is for the left side. Goes right over here, behind the wheel. And that's causing the wheel to bind up. So it looks like I'm going to have to do some filing straight away to make that work. First things first, just get rid of some of that flash. There's not too much flash on these parts, so the cleanup is pretty easy. It's going quick so far. Looking more closely at the instructions, what they say to do for clearance is to file away some of the frame material. This is of course going to take quite a bit of filing since there's a lot of metal to get out of there. I'll just file away some at a time and then check the side on there along with the wheels to make sure that they have clearance. Once the parts do have full clearance, I guess I'm not actually supposed to assemble them to the model yet. I'm just supposed to set them aside for later on in the assembly. And while looking for binds, I also found that there are some bits of flash on the backs of some of these wheels. So I'm just carefully trying to remove some of that too. Looks like a little bit of chrome chipped away on this side. That's okay. All I need is for this to work. There we go. Now you can see that the wheel has full clearance from the firebox side. Now I just need to finish the second one to make sure that it has the same clearance. Okay, things are looking good for both sides now. And there's a nice little pile of metal left behind. Had to take quite a bit of material off. But now that that's done, I think I can get on to doing the actual side rod work now. First thing to do for the main rods is to clean up the crosshead parts. There's not much flash on these, so this shouldn't take much work to do. Just get a little grip there. File off a bit at a time until that's smooth. And be very gentle. So as you can see here, these are very, very thin parts. And in addition to doing the filing there, I also have to drill out the hole myself. So I'm going to put this onto this piece of steel I've got. Just going to hold that down while I use a 1.2 millimeter bit to carefully drill that out. That's most of the way through now. I'm going to do the rest of it while holding onto it gently. Okay. Don't see any burrs there. Feels smooth. So I'll just make sure the, let's see, it says this is an 090 or 0090 screw. Very, very small. That fits perfectly in place. But I also have to drill the hole for the back of the crosshead. And that isn't marked at all. The screw also has to thread into it, so I'm going to have to drill a slightly smaller hole. I'm going to start with this 1 millimeter bit and hope for the best. Drop the bit down there and get the hole started. I'm not going to go through the whole thing while holding it this way. I just want to get a starter marked in there. And by doing it that way, it started right where it needed to be. Now 1 millimeter might be just a bit small for that screw because the calipers measured that to be 1.15. So I'm just gonna roll the bit around like this a little bit. That'll help to open up the hole. So now when I drop the screw through, I will hopefully be able to carefully thread this into there. And since it's a shallow hole, I think this will actually do fine, unlike the frame holes from the last video. And went at a slight angle, but I think that'll turn out all right. I can work with that. Okay, the assembly feels good and tight. So that's one down. Both of those crossheads are put together now. So I'll just do a little cleaning on the main rods. They're pretty clean already though, so not much to do here. Just take a bit of that seam off of the top and bottom. The rest looks pretty good overall. So now with the rod cleaned up, I can install that to the crosshead. Back that screw out. Okay, I do also need to open up this hole a little. So I'm using the 1.2mm drill bit. Gotta make sure it has free movement around that screw. Now place that into the crosshead. Oh, and also, these main rods do have specific sides to them. This part with the ring faces inward. That's the spacer that fits against the side rod. Place that in there. And gently screw it back together. And I've got free movement, so that's good. Main rod has plenty of slop in it, and in this case, you want there to be a lot of free movement. Now I need to make sure the crosshead guides are clean and straightened out. These are really thin, delicate parts, so I'm glad to see that there's no flash around the edges of the actual guide parts, just around the main mounting lug. Just gotta file that off of there. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, I think this part's ready to use. I'll just put the crosshead through there real quick. Well, I do need to straighten out the guides in order to hold the crosshead. And I will do that very carefully. Smooth jaw pliers. Let's see how that looks. Okay, crosshead fits in there. Seems to be staying in place. I'll give it more adjustment later as needed. So far that's looking good. And now to fit those crosshead guides to the cylinders, I have to drill the holes out just a little larger. 3 32" drill bit should do the job. Apparently, 3 32" drill bits didn't exist back when this was made. Or maybe they were just too lazy to go out and buy one. Okay, a little tight, but that's just the right size. Yeah, that's perfect. Now to get them on, I'll just use a touch of super glue on there. Stick that inside. And before it sets, make sure it's sitting straight in there. Just like that. Now with all those taken care of, the last major part is the crosshead yoke here. that out. And this is going to need some cleaning just like the rest of the parts. And I'm also going to have to drill these pinholes out. These will align with some small pins that you can see right here on the back of the crosshead guides. And that'll really help to hold things together. To drill these holes out, I'm using a 0.7mm drill bit. Just have to align it with these pinholes in here. Now to drill those holes out, they're visible from this side instead of this side, which would have made it easier. So I'll place it onto this block here to do the drilling. That way I can at least have a flat surface. And just carefully drill through. Let's see, this bit's a little dull. I'll have to change that out for a different one. It happens with these small drill bits, especially when you get cheap ones. They just tend to wear out pretty quickly. Yeah, I think that's starting to get through. Now with those holes done, last one is the top mounting hole. For this one I can just drill straight through with my power drill. The bit's a little bit dull, but it'll go through. Okay, so the bit's not a little dull, it's extremely dull. I've gotten a lot of use out of it. Come on. There we go. I think it's about time I replace that bit. Let's file that smooth. And according to the instructions, this is going to take another 080 screw, so I'll countersink that the same way that I did for the parts on the frame. Just use this large bit to gently change that to kind of a cone shape. I'm only touching that lightly to the top of the hole, so I don't want it to bite in and go through. And now to get this fit in place, I've already put the cylinders back onto the frame. Just have to align these holes with the pins. That went on pretty well. Make sure this is straight, or as straight as possible. Now of course the mounting hole for this part was not drilled or even marked in the frame, so I'll just set that on there and use that as a starting point. Got my 080 drill here. Mark that hole. And now drill through the rest of the way. And I'll put a touch of oil on that bit just to make sure that it can go through easier and not wear out so quickly. Holes in there, so just go through that a little at a time with the 080 tap. I am so glad that I bought this tap because it has made this much, much easier. Okay, so before I actually put that piece onto there, I'm going to work on getting the crossheads and main rods installed, and then I'll finish by putting this on. Okay, so the wheels are back on. You can see here that the crosshead rod, or the piston rod, is currently way too long. So what I'm doing is, I have the wheel in the full forward position right now. I'll use my calipers here to measure how much needs to be cut off. Just Just going from the center of that screw head to the center of the hole. And that's about 6.6 millimeters. And then trim that off. So now when I put it in here, that should also be just the right length. If there's any bind, I can just trim a tiny bit more off the front of that rod. Now, in order to work smoothly, one more thing they recommend doing is making just a light bend to the shape of the rod. Not much, just a light one. Straighten it out there. So I'll put that on and we'll see how it works. Okay, so it looks like the length that I cut it to is working. I just need to clean out the hole a little bit to get rid of a small bind, and then that one will be ready to go. Drawing the hole out with a 3/32 bit did the job. So now just one last thing I noticed was the screw is sticking out and could potentially bind with the screw on the drive wheel, so I just want to make sure to trim off the end of that a little. I think that'll help. It's just one more small bind with this rod, and I found that things were just a little too tight with how the screw was fitting, so I'll file this down a little bit. Don't want to go too much. Now that is working nice and smooth. So I can finish that by putting this part onto there. Get those pins lined up again. Hopefully this won't introduce any new clearance problems. Okay. See, I feel just a small bind. I think it's maybe those corners right there. So I'll round those off a little, see if that helps. Okay, those are a little more rounded off now, and I think that did the trick. Any side rods that get close will just kind of roll into place a little, and that helps it to feel a lot smoother. So with that, all that's left to do is the valve gear detail. Now this one does not have a working valve gear because it only has these two small external parts with the rod that goes through there. On the real ones, the valve gear linkage was all internal, which is obviously not possible to do with this model. So this is some of the wire that I'm supposed to use for the valve gear parts. I don't think they could have possibly picked a worse way to package this though. I have to carefully cut around all these different parts here just to get it out. Hopefully I won't damage anything. After some cutting and pulling, I got the wire out. I still have to get the rest of that plastic off of there. But that vacuum sealing really was the worst way to do that. There, I finally got it. I think the rest is clean. Almost clean anyway. All right, so here are the two sizes. Use this thicker wire to use as the shaft that holds that in place. And then the thinner wire is the piston rod for the valve. I have to straighten that out a little, but that'll look fine. As for the location, once again, they didn't put any marker at all on there. So I think what I have to do is drill a hole somewhere around the middle here for the wire. Then that'll stick out from there, hold the linkage right there. And then there'll be one more wire that gets over to here, which means I might have to drill another hole through there. After a little more examination, I found the perfect drilling point should be right here. And I can use this rod as kind of a marker for the height of the hole. And then it should go right about in the center there from what I'm seeing in the instructions. The instructions aren't really detailed on where to put the hole, so that's just the best I can determine. Now for cutting that wire to length, now that I've got the hole drilled, I've just got this stuck into the hole as far as it'll go. And then I can't have it going into the area of the side rod. So I'm cutting it to this length right here. And I can glue this into place. It's just a touch of super glue. And stick that into the hole. And this is a fairly soft steel wire, so if I ever need to, I can bend that around a little to get things lined up just right. Now for this part, I'll drill that hole out so that it can fit onto the wire, being really gentle not to damage the part. Okay, I've got the part ready, so I'll just put a touch of super glue onto that wire. That ended up being a little more glue than I expected to use, but that's fine. That won't cause any problems. Just stick this onto here. And that is right where it needs to be from the look of it. Now to figure out exactly where to put the holes when I'm drilling, I just kind of followed this hole, lined up with there, and then made a little scratch marker on the inside. So that'll tell me where I need to drill. Okay, I've got that drilled. And while that's off, I thought I'd go ahead and make the valve gear rods. To do that, all I'm doing is putting the wire into the end here. There's a small hole in the front of the cylinders. Just kind of line that up with where the crank is at. And then give that a nice sharp 90-degree bend. And then I'll just cut that to length and put everything back in place. Well, it looks like there's another thing they didn't really account for in the design of this kit. You can see here that the side rod screw hits the valve gear rod. Looks like I'm going to have to bend that around to kind of an unrealistic shape for clearance. Well, it doesn't look quite as good, but at least there's clearance now. That won't bind anymore. So I just put a little drop of glue there to hold it in place. And I think that'll lift out with this when I'm ready to paint. If not, I'll just pull the part out and then reinsert it later. Okay, the last part's in place, so the whole side rod, main rod assembly is done. Now, if this was one of Arbour's larger kits like the 284, 2104, or Allegheny, this would have had the full working valve gear linkage using the same material as the rest of the kit. And I actually had a chance to work on another 284 chassis a while ago that had its original linkage, unlike the one that I own. And the parts were definitely extremely soft and not good to work with. And the owner of the chassis who had me build it sent a brass precision scale kit to use with it, which I'm happy to say was a lot better than the one that I used before. And I would say that it's definitely a good idea to use better quality valve gear parts on these kits if you're building an Arbour Models kit that has one. For this though, it's at least just a couple simple parts and some steel wire, so nothing to worry about too much there. So in the next video, I'm going to be installing the motor and getting this chassis running.